Just after sunset, the colonel called a council of war. Originally, Elora had wanted no part of it. As the battle wound down to its brutal conclusion, the day's exertions at last caught up with her. She began to sway and tremble. A spear she'd wielded like it was nothing became heavier than lead in her grasp. An attacker made a charge, only to be blindsided by Luke John. The pair went down in a tangle of limbs, and Elora's heart leapt to her throat with fear for her friend. She collapsed to her knees beside the young man. A shape moved between her and the sun, but Elora didn't need to see features to recognize Corey Bannerfin. The warrior stalked in a circle around the girl. "Alive!" she heard someone cry, in a voice hoarse from trying to make itself heard over the conflict. She couldn't place a name to it, but from the tone she assumed it was one of the officers. "Colonel wants prisoners, Shando." "Doing our best, Cap," came the reply, from a sergeant that Elora knew. "Bloody hell," snarled Corey, and a shiver trilled up Elora's spine as she realized the warrior's anger was directed at her. "Lady Corey," Luke John tried to say, but Corey cut him off. "I'm no lady," she snapped. "Sit and be silent." Corey gave him no time to think. Before Luke John knew it, he was once more on his rump. "I'm sorry," Elora started to say, and then cut herself off, because she wasn't. When Corey turned to glare at her, with a gaze that would do a basilisk proud, she met the tall woman's gaze without flinching. "What were you thinking, Elora Dannon, playing hero like that?" "I saw what was happening. I had to stop it." "You like to got yourself killed, girl. If I'd done nothing, and these attackers had seized the gate, would we be any better off? That's not the point." "Forgive me. I forgot. I'm the sacred princess, saviour of the world. Fates forfend I should ever lift a hand in my own cause." "Don't play the snip with me, girl. After the dragon's realm, you should think more on the consequences of your acts before indulging yourself." "The same applies to you, Corey, and to Drumheller." "You went to the dragon's realm?" Luke John asked in a whisper. "Mind your business, boy," Corey told him, then looked him over. "You hurt?" He shook his head. "On your feet then, give a hand with Elora." His hound rose too, with that liquid grace unique to his kind. Elora, however, clambered up in fits and starts. She was grateful for Luke John's arm about her waist. In the battle's aftermath, troopers from the fort had been busy. The enemy slain were being dragged to a communal grave, the few survivors manacled and placed under guard. Even so, Corey took no chances. She gave the scene a wide berth, herself and the hound, between Elora and their foes. As they made their way toward the main gate, Elora noted a fair number of Saint-Denis soldiers among the dead, and asked about it. It was the Sergeant Shando who answered. "Not much for mercy, the Shengwei," he told her. "In a fight or after?" Shengwei?" stammered Luke John. "So far from home? Shando, are you sure?" "You know your business, scribe, I know mine. Weren't no raiding party neither, these were proper soldiers." Shando looked ahead at the fort's towering ramparts. If they'd seized the gate, the way he said that left no doubt in anyone's mind about the consequences. "They have more," Elora said flatly. "Best tell the colonel." "Drumheller's already doing so," said Corey. "This one's for where she belongs. Bed." "I'm all right, Corey." "You'll need the rest, lass," Shando advised. "We all will, the way this lot fights," and he waved a hand toward the Shengwei. "Puts the Mason to shame. We all need our strength. Watch out there!" A pair of riders barely missed Elora's party as they thundered around the periphery of the stronghold to intercept the main road back to Saint-Denis. Corey spat a mouthful of dust as she watched the riders disappear. "Only two," Elora noted, "both heading to Saint-Denis. Shando, how many other patrols are there?" "4 more all told, the best part of a reinforced company." "They get no warning of what's happening?" "Colonel's orders, milady. Your pardon, but I best be returning to my duties." With that, the sergeant moved off, and they stood now in the shadow of the gate itself. "He can't just abandon them, Corey," Elora protested. "There are other ways of sending messages, lass," the warrior told her. "Quicker and more certain, given our allies. The colonel knows his business. Let's leave him to it." Elora refused to acknowledge her exhaustion. The awful paradox was that she was so far gone with fatigue she could neither sleep nor eat. Her nerves were still jangly from the outburst of energy that had propelled her from the gate. Obstacles to sleep piled up faster than snowdrifts in a winter blizzard. Orders had been issued to all the fort's craftsmen and women, and within the hour the war yard was bustling with activity. Scores of moulds were used to forge replacement weapons for those sure to be lost over the course of the battle to come. Teachers and parents did their best to calm the growing apprehension in the many children, far too many, Elora realised, the fort's population of non-combatants, swollen to bursting with refugees from the frontier towns upriver. Livestock represented one of the greater problems. How much would be needed to sustain the fort in case of siege? Some demanded the colonel drive the combined herd downriver, and when he refused, they demanded permission to take the herd themselves and their families with them. To that demand, the colonel relented, and more frantic preparations began among the refugees for a departure the next morning at first light. In the meanwhile, Elora added all the myriad sounds of the barnyard to her catalogue of misery. When Thorn finally poked his head round her door, Elora was actually relieved. "What's up?" she asked, from beneath a mountain of down pillows. "Colonel Duguerin requests the pleasure of your company." "You saw everything I did," she said. "Perhaps, but I wasn't the one who sounded the alarm." She considered a moment, then began a wiggle toward the edge of her bed. She blearily noted Rule atop the headboard, making no secret of his amusement at her state. Frangine indicated the neatly folded cloth that rose beside him, almost to the height of his own head. It was a caracalla, a warrior's scarlet war cloak of Melton wool, very tightly woven. This one had clearly been made for Elora by the brownies, their fingers as nimble with needle and thread as with picklocks. It hung with surprising comfort from Elora's shoulders. "You've outdone yourself, my lads," she complimented them. "This feels delicious." "The weave's laced through with iron cloth," Frangine told her. "Not as strong as the steel mail, but it'll deflect its share of attacks." Certainly easier to wear. Elora snugged the cloak close about her body. The council was in the colonel's office. Elora's arrival was met with mixed emotions from those gathered round his desk. Among the Daikini officers, disdain and even hostility. Whatever her title, they considered her little more than a slip of a girl, with precious little to offer their deliberations. The non-coms knew her better. Shando quirked his lips in a smile of welcome. Tyrell, liege lord of the realm of Lesser Fairy, strode over to embrace her with a hug that left her near breathless. Ranulf Duguerin was more reserved and circumspect in both regards, and Elora understood in that instant why his men respected him. Whatever his feelings, he kept them superbly masked as he indicated a place for her and Drumheller. Duguerin himself was the calm centre of this growing tempest. He was the kind of man most folks called compact, because to describe him as short would provoke a fight. Any such conflict he'd be sure to win, because every aspect of his body bespoke solidity and strength. He'd served the Republic for 30 years, and while the rigours of that duty had been etched indelibly on his face, they were tempered by equally deep lines of laughter. "On behalf of the Republic of Saint-Denis," he said quietly, "I bid you welcome, Elora Danan, to Fort Tregar, though, as I recall, this isn't the first time you've graced us with your presence." She flushed, casting memory back to the night she spent here in the company of a troubadour named Duguay. Through him she found an ability to sing, and through those songs to inspire powerful emotions in her audience. Like many she had known, Duguay turned out to be far more than what he seemed. He wasn't human, but an otherworldly entity of power called the Lord of the Dance, who had sought to win her to his side as his eternal partner. Instead, it was she who'd won his heart, and in the dragon's realm he had sacrificed himself to save her. "It was kind of you to remember, Colonel," Elora replied. "Nothing of the sort. It was a rather remarkable performance, capped, I believe, by a tumult at our main gate that involved you." "And some Mason," she finished. "Then, as now, we are in your debt." "How may I help?" Elora stifled a sudden great and unexpected yawn. An orderly stepped up behind her, campaign chair in hand. Gratefully, she sank onto the seat, acutely conscious of how sickly she must look to the others. "More tired than I thought," she said to Thorn. "In that case," the colonel said, "we'll be brief." He gave his attention first to the maps, and then Elora. He didn't request her own recitation of events. Instead, he looked at her from under his dark brows and asked simply, "How many?" "If you kill 100 of them," she replied, "for every one of us within these walls, they'll hardly notice the loss." "Impossible!" snapped one of the officers. "Who could muster such a force?" "The one thing the Shengwei have never lacked," replied the colonel, "is manpower." "But to march an army through these mountains? Colonel, they'd have to cross the stairs to heaven themselves." "Evidently they found a way, Lieutenant. But to bring a force this far undetected?" "Frontier's been deserted these past months," said the chief of scouts, a lean, laconic man whose dress was as individual as his manner, a combination of military uniform and outback buckskin. "A raiding party I can understand, slipping past our patrols. This is an army." "Didn't slip past nothing, Cap," growled Shando. "Ran right over the patrol what found 'em. We're a good troop, they knew the ground. They had experience fighting the likes of us," meaning Daikini and the Mason, "and the likes of them." He poked a thumb toward Tyrell. "So how come they got dead so quick? Not a one of 'em managed to get himself clear?" "There's a more disturbing implication," Thorn interjected. "Originally, our enemies hereabouts were renegade forces of the realm of Greater Fairy." Lesser Fairy consisted of those races among the Vale folk who lived mainly in the world, on the Daikini side of the Vale. Fairies, boggarts, trolls, ogres, pixies, dryads, nelwynds, and of course brownies, to name but a few of their number. The peoples of Greater Fairy resided on a different plane of existence. The world was some place they chose to visit, and then only rarely. It was never their home. "As a consequence," Thorn continued, "and thanks to our alliance with Tyrell and his folk, all Saint-Denis patrols should have included representatives of Lesser Fairy to warn their Daikini companions of any magical attack." He looked at Tyrell. "I take it you felt nothing amiss in this instance?" Tyrell slowly shook his head. "So," said Thorn, "their powers are arcane as well as temporal. Moreover, they have the means of keeping their deeds well hidden." "How long?" Colonel de Guerin demanded of Elora, but it was one of his staff who answered. "From where the girl and Master Drumheller encountered the patrol," she consulted one of the maps, "close to a fortnight. Plenty of time to prepare proper defenses." "A day," Elora countered flatly. "No more than 2. "This is our business, young woman," said the officer who'd just spoken. 100 men, no matter how skilled, can't hold the main gate of this fort for a week. Even if they torched it, that week's more than enough time to effect repairs. True," she acknowledged, "the main body of the Shengwei army is farther back. There's no way to hide the tread of so many feet, especially as they close in. But put a force between them, a proper regiment, and it's a whole different game." "Your sorcery tell you all that, girl," scoffed the officer. "My wits," Elora almost said, but fortunately managed to bite back her reply. "I have no sorcery." "Suppose the commando assault had proved successful," Elora continued to make her case. "Right away, we're on the active defense, fighting desperately to retake positions already lost. We're so caught up in one threat, we've no resources to spare against the other. Even if we defeat the second strike force, we've lost troops and especially time that can't be replaced. When the final assault comes, we'll be that much weaker." Her gaze met the colonel's. He'd come to the same conclusion, had entered the room hours ago with it. He'd brought her here as a test of her inability. "Your response, Elora Danan?" he asked her, to both the Shengwei threat, she realized, and the implicit challenge of his officer. She shrugged her shoulders. "As you say," she told the officer, "this is your business. I've only just begun to learn the craft." "As it happens," the colonel told everyone, "the Sacred Princess's strategic and tactical analysis squares with my own." His use of her title was deliberate, to remind his staff of her proper place in the scheme of things, one that stood far higher than their own. Only an idiot throws away a force of this caliber to no purpose, and whatever we may think of this Shengwei commander, he is no idiot. The fact that he was able to cross the stairs to heaven at all is proof of that. I believe we can expect a significant assault at any time. Our one advantage is that this second force shouldn't have much in the way of siege equipment. Bridges to span the moat, ladders for the wall, battering rams for the gates, that should be it. Anything more will slow them down too much. And when that main force of Shengwei does arrive, I want them to have reached our walls over a carpet of their own dead. It was a sober speech, and a sombre group that broke, not long after, to continue preparations for the fort's defence. Only 4 remained with the colonel as he set glasses on the table and opened his sideboard for a bottle of fine cognac. With an air of tradition, Duguerin poured each of them, Shando, Tyrell, Thorn, and Elora, a large glassful. Then he raised his own, and though he was looking toward them, his gaze encompassed far more than this room. "I could ask for better odds," he said, "but not comrades." His eyes turned to Elora, and she rose to her feet. "It is both honour and high privilege to stand with you, lady," and he touched the rim of his glass lightly to hers, the crystal sounding a pure, clarion note at the contact. "My folk are already at work," Tyrell told the colonel. "Come morning our foes will have an easier time crossing a bog than the field beyond the moat." Elora shook her head, savouring the heady tang of the cognac as it scorched flame down her throat. It was like swallowing a fire drake, and she had to restrain herself from an attack of giggles. "By midday," she said, "the ground will be bone dry, with the Caliban waiting for any of your folk foolish enough to venture forth to re-energize the spells. Would they come so far, Colonel, without preparing for every contingency?" "They're a methodical people, the Shengwei." "By all means, Highness," Duguerin finished to Tyrell. "Do your best, but as the sacred princess says, keep your folk within the walls when the enemy arrives." "Truly the Caliban, Drumheller?" Tyrell asked of Thorn. "In all my years I've never felt no sign of its feet upon the earth." "By rights, by legend, you're not supposed to. Like a demon, the Caliban walks beyond the boundaries of the 12 realms. Like demons, the price of its summoning is—" "What is it?" Elora inquired. "Before this, I'd never heard of the monster." "It's a name rarely mentioned," Thorn replied, "for fear it might hear and answer the call. It slays those who work with magic and claims their power for its own. Hence the Baronties. It travels with its own sorcerous circle. Some tales call it the one foe the Malavoy respect. Others say it is their creature. On one thing the stories all agree. No one who ever faced the Caliban in battle survived to tell the tale." "How do you kill it?" the colonel asked. Thorn looked lost. After that, there was little more to say, so Elora took her leave. Luke John was waiting on the porch with his hound. Elora pressed herself against him in a fierce embrace. There was no flex to her as the young man's hold tightened. She might well have been cast from the pure metal she resembled. Each breath filled his head with the scent of her. There was a clean, wind-swept tang to her hair that reminded him of Highland woods on a crisp spring day. "It can't be so bad," he offered gently. "No, it can't," Elora agreed, voice muffled against his shoulder. She pulled away. "But it is." And she told him why. "You need sleep," he recommended, as they walked hand in hand through the compound. "I've had my share and more. I'll be fine, Luke John." "I didn't think I'd see you again so soon." "I'm just sorry for the circumstances." She scuffed the hard-pan dirt of the parade ground with the toe of her boot. "I wish disaster wouldn't follow so close on my heels." The Shengwei didn't come that night, nor the next, and Elora began to hear mutterings throughout the stronghold that she'd sounded a false alarm. The fort's civilian residents quickly began to chafe under Duguerin's strict martial regime. He was preparing for a siege they doubted would come. It didn't seem to matter that all the decisions were his. Somehow, it seemed more natural to heap all the blame on the sacred princess. As a consequence, Elora stayed pretty much to herself. Time and again, during the day, she cast her consciousness into the earth, seeking any sign of the Shengwei, only to find an eerie silence. By day, she was most often found with Luke John. As a senior apprentice scribe, his place was to be present at whatever meetings his master could not attend. He also served in the local militia, and his troops had grown to rely on him, to trust his judgment, the way they did the old campaigners. He smiled when Elora pointed that out. "You grow up here in the outback along the frontier," he said. "Being a quick study and a good one is a matter of survival. I stay close to my master to learn his craft. I watch Shando and Colonel de Guerin and Lord Tyrell to better my skills at theirs. I prefer the one I need to other. Survival beats the alternative, don't you think?" "I hope I'm wrong," Elora said. Then a bleakness came over face and tone. "I wish," Elora began, only to trail off. Luke John echoed this with a sigh, shifting position on the log they were using to seat themselves. Where's that troubadour you were with?" he asked, after watching the yard a while. "Duguay, you mean?" "Aye, way he looked at her and acted, I got to figuring, well, you know." She slid her eyes toward him. "He was my companion, Luke John." "That's a word with its share of meanings." "What's that supposed to mean?" she snapped defensively. "He was a friend. He died. For me." "I meant no offence, Elora Danan." "The question was offensive, Luke John. I am offended." With each line, she took a step back to the girl she'd been, spoiled rotten amidst the royal court of Angwin. In a heartbeat, the girl became once more every inch an imperial princess, arrogance rippling from her like the great war cloak she wore. "How fares your master?" Elora inquired, taking refuge in what she hoped was an innocuous pleasantry. "And his library?" "Even with the recent troubles, he's managed to get hold of some new volumes." "Could I see?" she asked suddenly. "What are you after?" Luke John wondered, as Elora prowled the 8-sided room. It would have been taller than the walls of the fort itself, had the main floor been set on ground level. "Knowledge, the secrets of creation, my purpose." She stroked the palm of her hand along the balcony railing. "There's power here," she said, meaning magic. "I wonder what makes this place so special. It's clear from the Stone's Age that the tower itself has been here ages." "Older than the fort, that's fact. It was here when the first pathfinders and trappers roamed up from the flat." "Luke John," Elora asked, taking a slow turn all the way round to take in the tower's entirety, "is there anything here that relates to—" Thought and words stumbled together, reluctant to give voice to the sardonic image that haunted her past. "That which is never named," he finished for her, and she nodded. "I'd have assumed such things would be locked away," she noted as she clambered up the steps cut into the wall. "Where's the sense in a library where you're no allowed to read the books? What about thieves?" She'd meant this as a jest, but Luke John took the remark in all seriousness. "Trust me, without permission you'd no make it past the door, Elora Danan." Like all tomes relating to the Malavoy, this one was huge, and in all likelihood as heavy as she. The straps were stiff with disuse, and she tore a nail struggling one free of its buckle. She was about to call down to Luke John when her eye was caught by a much smaller work. Every physical element was a testament to the care taken with its construction, from the bindings to the deerskin cover. Whoever had done this work wanted it to last. Her breath caught in a gasp of astonishment as she stumbled upon a series of line art sketches. She found Corey's face and smiled at how little the years had changed her. And farther on, the High King Asana. There was a picture of them both in some kind of military conference. There was an aspect to their stance, the way Asana's hand rested on hers, that told Elora there was more between the two than the mutual regard of monarch to warlord. Elora felt dizzy and sank to the floor. Her world collapsed into a kind of chaos. Stone turned malleable as candle wax, and Elora felt it give on every side, bending as though it had assumed aspects of the ocean. She reached out an arm, and her eyes went wide to behold a limb that stretched longer than a spear. She looked down to find her legs shriveling to the size of a doll's. The fault was not in the world, that inner voice consoled, but in herself, and being in herself could be overcome. She heard footsteps on the stairs, tried to cry out to Luke John. Shapes blurred before her eyes, taking on a cruel duality, the way things do when you let both eyes lose their focal point. Except in this case, Elora didn't observe double images of the same reality. A completely different vision imposed itself, replacing the sight of open air above the skylight with a ceiling, illuminated by torches. Hurried feet along the stairs gave way to a deliberate tread across an earthen floor, as she beheld Asana. "No!" Elora cried, and her ears heard Corey's voice. "No forgiveness, Corey," Asana said. "I will not shame us both by asking for that which you will not give." "What have you done?" "What must be done to bring this conflict to an end." He didn't expect her lunge. In truth, he'd been surprised to find her even conscious. He used his fist to finish the job of sedating her. Elora fell as Corey did, and was sick on the floor, because she knew what came next, that the warrior would wake to find herself a prisoner of her deadliest enemies, knowing that the king she trusted had sold away her soul for the promise of peace. Elora pushed herself upright, and found that stone was once more dependably solid. She heard the sound of boots on steps, and her heart leaped to her throat. She started to call Luke John's name, just as he came to view, and relief was more welcome than a spring rain. She owed him an explanation, and, with the book's help, gave it to him. "You know they call him the Haunted King," he told her. "No, not so much anymore," he continued, "but in ages past there were stories about him." He waved his hand to encompass the library stacks. "The greatest king in Daikini history, well, until he betrayed his greatest friend." "What happened after?" "Asana lived to a ripe old age, and it's said that to know him was to watch a man lose everything that made him human. No one's even sure he actually died. There's some in the old writings who claim that our troubles descend from that betrayal, that the foes in those old days, those who must remain nameless, weren't properly defeated. Are they right, Elora Danan?" She had no answer beyond a shrug. "Is ancient history such a thing?" she asked, "for those whom time is as easily traversed as space is for us? Compared to the Vale folk, the lives of Daikini are nothing. We dance our little while, and then we're dust, and how much of our knowledge vanishes with us? When do we have the chance to transform it into true wisdom, Luke John? Thorn's young as Nelwyn's go. Chances are he'll know your great-grandchildren. I saw a dragon for whom these people," and she shook the book at him, "weren't just pictures in a book, they were real." "Less time, perhaps," he replied, taking a seat by her side. "A greater incentive to do more. Age don't always connote wisdom." "I don't want to make Asana's mistake." "Who said it was a mistake? He was High King, yah. We're a water win. He takes the offer, well, he has a semblance of peace." Elora said nothing, and Luke John's lips pursed with anger at the thought that she wasn't listening. He looked down to her hands. "Whenever you're frustrated, kinda like puppy worrying an itchy patch of skin," she made a nasty face at the image, which she didn't find complimentary, "you start tracing circles, same pattern every time." Elora looked, and saw it was so. 3 interlocked rings, bound together by a 4th. "It's how I feel sometimes," she told him, "spinning in circles. The physical world, this globe we Daikini live upon, spins daily on its axis like a top. At the same time, the moon revolves around us. The world and moon together, in turn, revolve around the sun. And the sun, what does it revolve around? Who knows, other than the dragons, and maybe Drumheller. The liege lord of dragons, Callan Dinir, told him all this when I was just a baby. The point is, everything moves in relation to everything else. As they do so, the balance of power ebbs and flows. You know about Magus points, yes? Where the lines of magic intersect both in our world and those beyond the veil," Luke John replied. He leaned over, tapped a knuckle on the diary she'd uncovered. "That one's mine," he said, with a measure of pride. "First book I found," and his smile broadened, "and near my last as well. I'd hate to think of what the scribe who found the Malavoy text had to go through." Elora spoke lightly, but there was an undertone of awe. If the challenge matched the prize— "Giles the Red they called him, so my master tells." "Your master knew that scribe?" "Yeah, they were mates. Giles Horvath. He lives in Saint-Denis, teaches at the university." "I've met him," Elora acknowledged. "Any road," Luke John said. "I want to hear the rest of what you were saying about the Magus points." "Magic is strongest where the lines of power intersect." She repeated what he'd said, for emphasis. "At the strongest of those points is where we find world gates, passageways to the other realms that lie beyond the veil. On one side, the realms and races who are anchored to a physical state of existence, like us and lesser fairy. On the other, those who tend more toward the spirit." "Greater fairy and the Malavoy?" Elora nodded. "But why," she continued, "should those lines of power be limited to just this one world? Perhaps they run through the cosmos as well. If we look throughout history, we see that Magus points aren't fixed. It may take generations, but they move." Then her musings led her to an unexpected inspiration. "I wonder, could the point of change referred to in prophecies about me occur because the world itself is about to pass through a Magus point? In the heavens?" "How could you chart such a thing?" "Haven't a clue, but it makes too much sense to ignore, and it would explain why time is so critical." "How do you mean?" "If we're building to a specific moment, then this really does become a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Only we're not speaking in terms of Daikini lives, but of the Vale folk. Were that opportunity missed ages ago with Cori and Asana, then could this be our chance to set things right?" Elora and Luke John came together in an embrace, and there was an all too real awareness of the bodies beneath their clothes. To their surprise, they made the next move as one. That was why, the moment their lips touched, they backed away, not so much startled by their own temerity as by the realization that the other had just thought the same idea. In that instant, the stakes rose higher than either was prepared to wager. The great book went away with Elora to show Drumheller and Cori. They had little time before Luke John went on duty with his troop. Impulse took them to the watchtower by the main gate. It was a decent climb, since this tower stood high above the ramparts. While Luke John swept the tree line for signs of the enemy, Elora looked down at the layout of the fort itself, and wasn't surprised to find it echoed the alignment of the scribe's tower. The fort itself was nestled in a hollow, and Elora had a sudden yearning for the companionship of her eagles. She wondered what the shape of this land would look like from their perspective, if the ridgelines that formed this valley would echo that of the tower. She looked down at her hands, removed one glove, looked again. The lines were indelible, in hand and glove both. The precision of their definition depended on how she looked at them. "Patterns," she whispered to herself. "It has to be the same here. The power exists in harmony with the earth, air, fire, water. But those are all mutable elements. Nothing about them is fixed. The land doesn't flow so easily. Once its pattern is established, that's how it tends to stay. So, for the land to reflect those patterns of magical energy, the way that this valley and Saint-Denis does, they must have been laid down when the very world itself was forming." "Your intuition does you credit, Elora Danan," said a new voice from behind. She whirled. The liege lord of Lesser Fairy was an ally, yet she'd reacted to him as a deadly foe. She was grateful then for her argent skin, so pale in the daylight that none could tell when the blood rushed from her features. "Another piece for my puzzle, my lord," she replied, "to add to my collection." "Why so upset then?" "I know already I don't like the paths I see before me." "As opposed to those already taken?" "What do you mean, Tyrell?" she demanded, when he made no reply. "There's summat about you that's changed, Elora Danan. A taste to your spirit that hasn't walked this world since I don't know when." "The days of Asana?" she prompted. Tyrell made a face of contempt and spat. Elora heard a faint buzzing that might have been mistaken for bees, but she knew better. Tyrell's bodyguards had pulled closer about the platform in response to his burst of agitation. "Do not speak that name, child," the monarch warned, "and have a care which path you choose to walk. You don't know everything, Elora Danan." "I know this, Tyrell. There are 12 great realms. I can't pick and choose between them, which to include in the binding and which not. Consider, then, perhaps we should let this binding pass us by." "And leave the world as it is? Look about you, Tyrell, and tell me if this is what you truly want." "Beg pardon, my lord," it was Luke John. "You're not interrupting, lad. We were just finished, the sacred princess and I." "They just called up from the main gate," Luke John continued. "There's a message pouch." "Good, it's past time. Still no sign of the Shengwei." A trooper clattered up the steps and handed the oilskin package to Tyrell. Elora struck first, with a swiftness that would have done Corey proud. There was no margin for error. She blinded Luke John with a shoulder check that knocked him off his feet. As he tumbled, she yanked her knife from its scabbard and used it to slash the package from his grasp. She flipped the blade across her body to bury its point in the wall opposite, a narrow finger width in front of Tyrell's nose. He flinched, giving Elora a decent berth. While Luke John was still falling, Elora used her other hand to grab for his sword. She felt a burst of pinprick stings down her front. The first of the fairies, believing their monarch to be threatened, had rushed to the attack. Fortunately, the sword wasn't for Tyrell. Elora let momentum carry her around for a second cut, this one lateral, to bury sword and package deep into the watchtower. The pouch was pinned against one of the iron spikes used to fasten timbers together. That was when the screaming started. Elora's eyes creased to slits, and Tyrell collapsed to his knees, like a man who'd just taken a cudgel across the shoulders. All about the waryard, cows bellowed and bulls rammed the walls. Cats puffed double their size and bared fangs while every dog in the place howled. The sole exception was Luke John's hound, who charged the watchtower at a flat run. Puppy was at their side in moments. His eyes went straight for the pouch, stance shifting to one of attack. Flames of purple burst about the sword. The blade grew pitted, their attack scoring the steel as acid would. Elora stepped forward to close her hand around it. She felt a burning sensation across her palm, where the edge drew blood. She sang a song of remembrance, reminding the steel of how it had felt when it was touched with fire, of the glorious moment when it was one with the molten heart of the world. The sword began to glow, red, then white, and finally a pristine radiance shot through with silver, so intense a glow that both Luke John and Tyrell covered their eyes. By rights, Elora's hand should have been reduced to ashes. Instead, it was the creatures in the oilskin who died. Elora breathed hard and held the sword out to Luke John. "There isn't a mark," he said. "As clean as the day it was forged," she agreed, "and happy to be so." "What did you do, Elora Danan? Are you all right?" "Tired." She turned to Tyrell and went to one knee before him. "There was no time for explanations, my lord," she told him. "That pouch!" "Your scouts, those who survived." "You killed them?" "I ended their torment with what mercy I was allowed. I freed them from bondage. I saved what they would have slain." "I am their liege, princess. They would not turn on me. Their fate is mine to decide." "Tell that to the Caliban. He would have claimed you too, given the chance. He took a try at me, Tyrell." She rose to her feet. "I know his taint. It was on that pouch." "Abomination!" Tyrell hissed. Elora wasn't sure whether he was referring to the Caliban or her. "One touch, Tyrell. The merest contact would have condemned you faster than the kiss of iron. It didn't feel like any magic I've ever encountered. More like chaos." "A demon?" "I hope not. But these are the times we live in, Majesty, where the rules that order our existence are splintering before our eyes. Would you still leave well alone when the power exists to make a change?" Tyrell hesitated. "Boy," he finally snapped, meaning Luke John, "summon Colonel de Guerin. The Shengwei have arrived."